Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Dublin Theatre Festival in Ireland has been running since 1957, which makes it, according to its website, the longest-running specialist theatre festival in Europe. Since 2011, Willie White has been its artistic director and chief executive, and I spoke to him about a month before the start of the 2023 festival and asked him what is the main focus of Dublin Theatre Festival.
Well, the approach I take to Dublin Theatre Festival is that it's a festival of contemporary theatre. So the contemporary expression, whatever way artists are making theatre, whatever they're talking about, that's my approach, my rationale. The festival has been in existence since 1957, and needless to say, it's changed a lot over that time. There are two parts of the festival. One is a very broad range of work from Irish artists that usually premieres at the festival. And then there's a complementary selection of international work that's intended to stimulate artists and audiences. And it's one of the few moments in the year in Dublin where we get to see international work.
And it's sort of the tail end, really, of the festival season. Edinburgh's just in its last week.
We don't think of ourselves as the tail end of anything. We think of ourselves as just ourselves. I think of us as contemplative and also absolutely not when I don't feel the fag end, the tail end or the butt end of anything. Although in sequence, we are one of the latter, that's for sure.
Yeah, because the festival season, really, it starts sort of just after Easter, and then Edinburgh is obviously the big one in this part of the world, but your festival has been running almost as long as Edinburgh, but it's distinctly different though, isn't it?
You think so?
Well, do you think so?
I guess, people have said in the past that we're the oldest single discipline festival in Europe. I don't believe that to be the case at all. I think the Rotary and Alley is before us. But in any case, in the very first festival in 1957, we had the Royal Ballet and the Dublin Grand Opera Society. So while theatre is the mainstream, the spine of the festival, it's always been accommodating of other related art forms. And certainly don't take a dogmatic approach to it. I mean, it needs to be work that is legible by our audience. So certainly dance theatre, certainly opera, certainly music projects with a theatrical component. So you're our own thing. Certainly, as I said, or something that's really important. We're in Ireland, and an island where the main language is English. What's really important for me is to connect our audience and our artists to theatre practice more widely. And that's why you see us strong. As much as we can afford, as much as we can fit in the limited venue infrastructure in Dublin, it's really important to see international work, by which I mean non-English. Although a lot of the time the artists will either have no language or speak in English, or there'll be subtitles or surtitles.
So what are the venues in Dublin? What's available for the festival?
Well, I mean, they're the Abbey and the Gate, who are the producing houses in the city centre. Then we have Project Art Centre, a place where I used to work, which is a black box art centre down on the campus of Trinity College. There's the Samuel Beckett Theatre, adjacent to Project in Temple Bar, the Smock Alley Theatre, a converted church with fixed seating rig. Then in the suburbs, there are art centres that were built in the 90s and the early noughties. We have a 19th century music hall, the Gaiety Theatre, that we occasionally use at Irish National Opera, will present its production of Faustin this year. There's the O'Reilly Theatre in Belvedere College, where one of the schools James Joyce went to. That's for us, that kind of corresponds with the Lyceum in Edinburgh. That's where we present that kind of, arty work that has an audience. So as well as the established theatres, we use all kinds of other types of venues led by the artists, making offsite work or making work sometimes for the outdoors or whatever. We have an open mind, but the spine of our venue infrastructure is quite modest. For a city that has a reputation internationally as a theatre city. We make do with what we have, but we could have a lot better.
But you said you try to bring in a lot of international work. During the pandemic, that became more local. Has that continued, using more Irish work? Absolutely not, no. I mean, that's the thing, that we couldn't do any work at all for a while. We opened to smaller audiences in 2021. The Irish work is there. It's an important part of the festival, but we certainly didn't become more local. We developed a more acute craving for the international work that animates the festival alongside, because it's really important to have the two alongside each other. It's not a competition, but, conventional playwriting to more adventurous, formally more adventurous work talking about non-traditional topics. And then with the international work, the two of those alongside each other, I think is just a really great kind of complement to each other, so that the audiences can have a much more rounded idea of what the possibilities are for theatre nowadays. And who are the audiences generally? It depends on the show. I mean, we have a loyal audience that's older, that's for sure. But last year we introduced an initiative mostly concerned about audiences returning after the pandemic.
that we would have 10% of our shows available for €10 to people under 30, artists and arts workers and the unwaged. It was a huge success. So immediately you're inviting people in who maybe would be interested, who perhaps don't have the resources to see the one show or many shows. It was almost all of the tickets sold out. You had people who, we just meant you've got artists, theatre fans, occasional audience members all together. So it just meant the work was much better received, I believe. And people were effusive in the people who took up on the offer were effusive in their praise about it and how it enabled them to see things they might never have seen before, how they took chances, how they saw many more shows and they would have maybe gone to see one and they saw multiple. So it was a fantastic success. And that means that those shows are now in the kind of the memory of the younger audiences and the younger artists, and more people are involved in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that's a criticism that's levelled at the Edinburgh Fringe, in that the Fringe shows, they've tended to price themselves out of being able to take those chances. And there's also been a problem since the pandemic of the accommodation costs have massively increased in Edinburgh. Have you found the same in Dublin?
We're not like a Fringe festival. I mean, we pay for the accommodation for the artists. We're nothing like the same scale as the Fringe. We're not an open invitation. We are a curated festival. So that means we're necessarily smaller and that the artists aren't the ones who have the financial risk. They have the artistic risk. That's enough, we judge. And then we take on the financial risk. But yeah, for sure, we're still, I wouldn't say we're resetting. I think we're still not even recovering. We're still trying to figure out what the impact of the pandemic has been. It's been traumatic on every part of society, not just the arts. And we don't fully understand the consequences yet. It just accelerated everything. Everything that was kind of fragile and weak was really, really tested, and some things just didn't make it. Yeah. So absolutely, yeah, we're thinking like about what is possible? What should we try these days after the pandemic? What have we learned? And what kind of work do we want to make? What kind of work feels important? What is the relationship that artists want to have with audiences? On what terms do audiences want to have artists present their work to them?
And have audiences come back after the pandemic?
Absolutely. As I said, we were concerned last year in the summer of 2022. Things had been open a little while. The anecdotal evidence was that business was slow. We didn't know if that was because there was a lot of tickets that had just been, postponed, and people only had so many nights they could go out. So we forecast our box office, which is a modest one anyway, downwards by about 25%, but we did the business. People actually wanted to go and see theatre. It was fantastic. It was gratifying. It was really, really reassuring that if you put something on that you think people might be interested in and you make the price right, then sometimes that works. And I guess it has to be paid for. We're in a situation in Ireland where public funding has increased significantly. In a way, weirdly, perversely, because we don't have a very developed philanthropic culture, because we don't have access to the same types of trusts and foundations that there are in the UK, because we're not experiencing the cost of living crisis in the same way. It's not that it's not happening, but it doesn't feel like it's as acute in Ireland. Also, we're still part of Europe. All of these things mean that it's a little bit easier. But when we were talking about ticket price earlier on, it needs to be paid for, right? So the thing is trying to find the right price ticket for the audience. So there will be some people, good for them, who will be able to afford 30 or 40 euro for a show that's costing a lot more to put in front of them. But then there will be others who really just cannot justify that expenditure. And for them, that's why there's a 10 euro ticket. I suppose our rationale is that we're disinclined to give tickets away, because then there's, people mightn't show up. But I think 10, it's cheaper than the movies, right? Yeah. And theatre's a lot more expensive to present than the movies, I've found. I
was wondering about that post-Brexit. Is it easier for some artists to travel to Ireland than it is to Britain? I know the other way around, British artists are finding it difficult to travel to Europe. But.
Oh, certainly. That's one of the terrible consequences, of course, for our UK colleagues, is that it's much more difficult to travel now and much more expensive. We have obviously the common travel area between Ireland and the United Kingdom. So that's another thing. Although people can travel easily, sometimes if you're importing equipment and exporting it shortly after, that can be tricky. But yeah, it's if you're in the Schengen area, it's pretty straightforward a lot of the time to get to Ireland. And yeah, despite its kind of geographical proximity, it's much more difficult, unfortunately.
So what's on offer this year then? What are the highlights?
Everything's a highlight, of course. We've 15 world premieres of new Irish work. And then we have two big shows from Brazil, a bunch of shows from Flanders, which is a powerhouse of performance in Europe, both by Flemish artists and artists who based themselves in Flanders. Two Brits with Sam Ward's Yes, Yes, No, No, and Tim Crouch's, Sam's show is We Were Promised Honey, and then Tim Crouch's Truth is a Dog, Must Too. I always get it wrong. What is it? Truth is a Dog. Let's call it just fresh from the Avignon Festival. And then work for children, work in the city centre, and work all around the suburbs. It's a really big festival this year, actually. It's 36, or if you count one Trilogy Day where two greatest hits are revived, 38 shows over 2.5 weeks. So it is not very far away for your listeners to pop over and check out Dublin. And tickets are affordable. Dublin is a small, walkable city, and you can see we've obviously timetabled in such a way that you can see lots of things in a short period of time. Over weekend, you can pack a lot in.
You have memories of the festival from long before you were in charge of it. You've been there for 12 years, but this is a festival that you've grown up watching, isn't it?
Yes and no, and I'm not from Dublin. So when I came to university, I actually don't think I went to a festival for a few years because I was in UCD. The campus is a little bit outside the city, and I was quite absorbed in student drama at the beginning of terms. But certainly, probably my first visit to the festival would have been in the early 90s, and I've been going since then. And you can see how much it's changed over that time, how much the aesthetic has got more ambitious, how much we've opened up to different European countries, particularly how much Irish work is starting to travel internationally, not to the usual places, not to English-speaking countries, but in Europe and to Australia as well. So absolutely. I mean, a festival should change. It's different under a given director. It's different at a particular point in time.
And now you've got a job which seems quite glamorous because you're travelling around the world, watching theatre around the world. Is it as glamorous as it seems?
It's definitely not glamorous. I enjoy it, so I certainly wouldn't want to say it's not enjoyable. And I feel really privileged, more privileged than a lot of the artists who get to come and see shows in the festival. I see lots of things we might never be able to invite. They're too big or too provocative or whatever. But it's very enjoyable. But if you think like exotic fancy hotels and fancy travel, no, I mean, I travel as cheaply and as sustainably as possible, bearing in mind that I come from an island. I'm packing a lot of stuff here together, actually, over what'll end up being a trip of more than a week. I've been in Essen, Bochum, Hamburg. I'm in Groningen in the Netherlands now, and then I'm going on to Edinburgh and via London afterwards. So it's tiring, but it's stimulating. That's why I do it. But certainly not glamorous. I get paid to do it, which is great. I feel it's really privileged. I get to see a lot more work than our audience or the artists come to the festival. So try to pay attention and bring work back that will resonate. I mean, for me, exotic or glamorous is train travel. I've been traveling around trains in Europe for the past few days. It's really nice and comfortable and fairly affordable. But no, not glamorous. But I love being part of an audience watching like the European Summer Festivals. So it's work, but it's enjoyable.
So how widely do you travel? What countries do you
It's mostly Europe. I don't think it's important for me to go and discover work much further afield. I can often see it in the European Festival, and, you know, if relevant for us, we can invite it subsequently. So it's mostly Europe, Northern Europe, and Portugal is really interesting stuff. But often, you know, France, the Festival d'Automne on throughout the autumn, so I think from the title, and European Summer Festivals from May until August, September. That's where I go. That's where usually we can find interesting work.
And it's all existing work, is it, in the festival rather than commissioned work?
We don't commission. We're more of a presenting festival. It would be lovely. In the past, we've been part of European projects where we've had the wherewithal to commission and to co-produce. And that's certainly something I would like, a position I'd like to find myself in again, but not right now, unfortunately. So it's we present international work and we present Irish work. In Ireland, the artists usually raise the money to make the work, or we come in as on the presentation. So if they can create the show, we can take the financial risk.
The funding for the festival, is it commercial and government funding mainly, apart from the tickets?
Our funding is mostly public money through the Arts Council, our national funding body. We, in the past, have had significant title sponsorships. That hasn't been the case, unfortunately, since not long after the crash. The market has changed since then as well. You're not seeing many festivals with title sponsorship, certainly, and depending on where you're located, lots of local business, and particularly from a smaller city, lots of local businesses will get on board. So it's mostly public money, ticket sales, and then some money from trusts, foundations, that kind of cultural agencies as well.
How did you come into theatre yourself in the first place?
I grew up in the countryside, about 60 miles from Dublin. I only ever saw one play before I was 18. And in fact, I think I didn't go to the Abbey till probably I was in Dublin for about 4 years, and only then because a mate of mine, Aidan Cardle, who played Mr. Selfridge. in the eponymous show. I think that was who he played. He was in The Iceman Cometh at the Abbey. I'd been in student drama with him. And then after college, I started in a French theatre company with my pals, gravitated towards producing, came across Project Art Centre, went to see work there, had my eyes opened about contemporary music, contemporary dance, different styles of theatre, visual art. Eventually, second time around, applied and got the job as a artistic director, where I was for 9 years. Already started to travel internationally then. I was a member of ITM, the Contemporary Performing Arts Network based in Brussels. Earlier, even than that job, I would have gone on pilgrimages to see the work of Ariane Mnuchin at the Cartoucherie and Peter Brook at the Labels du Nord, and subsequently discovered other festivals through following artists whose work I was interested in. So that was what I would do for my holidays. And turns out I enjoyed it. I'm a Europhile, speak reasonably good French, started learning Portuguese during the pandemic, which is great because we have two big Brazilian shows this year in the festival. One is a dance piece, one is a text piece. And we have, I'm not sure if people are aware, but we have a very large Brazilian population relative to its size in Dublin. About 80,000 Brazilians in Ireland. And actually in the city centre in Dublin, we have several thousand Brazilians living there. Brazilian colleagues this year for the first time, I think. Certainly the second time it's not. So just trying to present work that brings different audiences together and actually talks about, I feel sometimes we can be quite self-involved in Ireland because theatre has been so much a part of our elaboration of a national identity even before independence, something that carries our reputation internationally, but we have to kind of open our minds and be more generous to hear other people's stories too. So we have two pieces that are very much about recent politics and society in Brazil and also the historical roots of the political and other issues today. So I'm curious.
Well, yeah, and I can imagine that seeing theatre in Paris like Peter Brook and Ariane Mnuchin at an early stage, that sets you on a certain road, doesn't it? That's
it was, unfortunately, like I missed the Mahabharata and, the greatest hits, so it was later in Peter Brook's career and also later in Mnuchin's career, but actually the buildings themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't in a long time had the feeling that I felt when I walked into the Cartoucherie for the first time or to the Bouffe du Nord. It's amazing, the idea, I'm sure Peter Brook would poo-poo it, the idea that it was somehow holy, but I certainly was bowled over. I saw the Adrian Lester Hamilton. Before that, I saw the French language version of Le Costume, the suit. And then with Mnuchin was a piece by Alain Sizou, Tambour sur le Digue, Drummers on the Dyke. So it was fantastic. Coming from Ireland with a strong literary tradition, our references would have been the UK, but seeing something from other parallel traditions was an eye and a mind opener. And then, of course, never shut up about it, my big theatre epiphany of all time was at the Edinburgh Festival in 1996, I think it was, seeing Pina Bausch's Nelkin at the Playhouse. That blew my mind forever. Yeah. Because I just had no idea that you could do those things on the stage. I was a little bit discombobulated by it initially, but then I went, wow, this is amazing. Give me more of this. And I got in a £5 ticket and moved to a good seat because despite the fact that it was Pina Bausch, the Playhouse was under full. I think it was a matinee maybe.
So after seeing theatre like that, you wouldn't be satisfied with just drawing room comedies and...
Well, no, you see, the thing is, I still have loads of, as we would say in Ireland, graw, love for these things. I'm not dogmatic. I'm into some things that are good. So I have very, very, very broad and Catholic taste. And the festival, not because of me, but it manifests that. We have work that's very much in line with the theatre tradition in Ireland. We have other work by Irish artists that's pushing further forward. And then quite unfamiliar work from perhaps unknown or not very well known in Ireland. And I just like theatre, so all of that works together for me.
Like you said, Ireland has quite a tradition of Irish practitioners in London as well, going back to the 19th century and before. You were talking about new work mostly, but does the festival look back on that legacy as well?
Not particularly from our point of view. The producing houses might mount significant revivals of work. There was one of Tom Murphy's, Whistle in the Dark was originally produced by John Littlewood at Stratford East. I think it was in 1962. The Abbey staged that last year, and that was amazing. Actually, one of the friends of the festival was at the original production. Couldn't get my head around that in the early 60s. So he's been going to theatre for at least 60 years. But the festival is more so about new things. New work, and that's about of course there may be occasion for a retrospective of an artist's work at a significant moment, but certainly if it's repertoire, it has to be a new production. And with me, I'm more interested in, I think the value of the festival is offering brand new work, because that's what the festival opportunity is about, trying to give a leg up to something that at another time of the year people might be as interested in or take a chance on.
Yeah. And you're out looking for new work all the time. So how far ahead are you planning at the moment?
Well, one of the unfortunate things in Ireland is that, certainly in the case of Dublin Theatre Festival, we're only funded annually. Multi-annual funding will eventually come. So I'm looking ahead to our application is being prepared at the moment. So I'm certainly looking ahead to 2024 and a little bit to 2025. It would be nice to kind of get rid, at least for a while, of the annual drag of writing an application that's quite similar to the one the previous year and actually concentrate on developing the program. So certainly we have a full program for the moment for 2024. That will change, and inevitably it does. Some funding doesn't come through, plans change, but it's a credible and interesting program. Again, I'm actually one that's even more ambitious than this year. So, 24 at least. It's never too early to start talking to me about something. That's what I would maintain. But we're certainly solid on 24 and thinking about 25 as well, within the constraints of the venue infrastructure in Dublin.
Yeah. And presumably you have a very good relationship with Dublin authorities, but also the Arts Council. Is the Arts Council more supportive? It's been squeezed a lot in the last few years in the UK, but is it more supportive in Ireland?
The Arts Council is fantastically supportive in Ireland. And what's more, in 2021, rather in 2020, its funding for 2021 was increased by, wait for it, 60%. So it is the best it's ever been from the point of view of funding. And we're very grateful for the Arts Council support, who currently support us more than they've ever done so before. I don't want to have a pot shot at the City Council, but it's the opposite. They spend much less in funding any kind of culture in the city that's not their own. They've got the library, they've got some galleries and so on, and smaller artist program and the rehearsal spaces. But the Arts Council supports us with more than $1 million, and the City Council, in terms of direct funding, it's a little over 30,000. So they're not significant in the scheme of things. We're very grateful for the funding, and I try to do a good job for Dublin with the festival, but just as a matter of fact, that's the issue. We, for all kinds of historical and geopolitical reasons, we don't have as many trusts and foundations and private wealth. And such private wealth as there is newer and doesn't tend to spend its money on theatre, not very much anyway. So we're mostly reliant on cultural agencies, a little bit from City Council, a little bit from tourism. Box office is really important, and then the Arts Council is the most important source of funding. And we hope to continue to earn their trust, and they think we're spending it well.
Yeah, well, that's something. You've got to keep a tight rein on the finances, I assume.
We absolutely do, because then you're not back the following year. So yeah, we're a small organisation, but we're generally quite prudent. We take as much risk as we can afford, but we're generally quite prudent and try not to stick our neck out too far so that we're back next year.
Do you have any long-term plans for the future of the festival, or is it just more of what you're doing?
Yeah, well, you referred to it earlier on in our conversation. One of the things I would love to be able to do is to generate work rather than responding to other people's good ideas, because that would just make us more versatile in our planning. We would be able to say, right, this is coming, but we'd like to do something like this. Here's an artist we want to work with. Who could we partner with? What might it be like? What audience might it attract? So that's certainly something. And one of the ways I hope to be able to achieve this is by being part of the European cooperation project again. The other thing that I really, really wish we could have in Dublin is better venues and more venues. We've lost so many venues. They weren't necessarily purpose-built, but they were functioning as venues. Be it parish halls or former cinemas or former printing works or former whatever warehouses. And the story of the last 20 years is that these have all been closed, sold, and turned to office blocks, apartments, or hotels. So at the same time that the funding is the best it's ever been from our national funding body, the infrastructure is the worst it's ever been. And I'm not interested in moaning. I just say, when you look at something like the factory opening there's more, in the end, it was more, was it twice as much?
Yes.
You look at how Manchester's attitude towards culture and just the kind of the story of the Manchester Festival since 2007, and the role the culture plays in making a city kind of proud and excited about itself. I'd love to see the same kind of leadership in Dublin. I'm not sure that we have a children's hospital here that's running significantly over budget, and we do much appetite for a new performing arts centre that came in at twice the original price. But I think something more modest, even like a 500-seat venue, the Black Box would be fantastic. It doesn't even have to be seated standing, but we need some kind of civic leadership on the kind of the topic of the cultural infrastructure for the city. Because one of the consequences of the pandemic, of course, is that from the business point of view, city centres are being hollowed out. People are spending more time at home. Retail has changed. elaborate plans for redevelopments that we're going to have shopping centres that now don't make as much sense. So if you're thinking about how we're going to get people to come into our city centre, and for it to continue to be vibrant, lively, welcoming, and enjoyable place to spend time, I think more investment in culture is part of that.
Yeah. You're talking about my city now, Manchester, and in the end they've had to rename the theatre after a London-based insurance company in order to get the funding to finish.
Is that right? I missed going over. My colleagues were over there, and I think I was speaking to Richard Gregory there, and it was the day that the City Council had announced that the budget they voted even more money. Wow,
yeah,
that's
it's now called Aviva Studios, not the factory.
We have an Aviva Stadium. No disrespect to Aviva, but we have an Aviva Stadium in Dublin, and everybody still calls it. Well, people of my generation still call it Lansdowne Road. It's where they rugby and football. So I'm sure it's square the circle, and it's not forever either, no doubt. Yeah. We have the example here of the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre, which is a fantastic 2,111 seat venue designed by Daniel Libeskind. It was built by an Irish entrepreneur. Unfortunately, finances didn't work out, and it was eventually bought by a private operator. But it has been called the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre, so that's our public, gas utility. But it won't be forever, and there'll still be a theatre there.
Yeah. And is I don't suppose there's quite the capacity, like in a place like Edinburgh, to move outwards, because some of the venues are as in the Edinburgh Fringe are as far out as Leith. Do you have that capacity to use other places?
Well, what happened? We've got 4 venues in the suburbs in Dublin.
Yeah,
they were built from the late 90s to the early 90s, and they are very rooted in their communities. And those venues are part of the festival, so they're the ones presenting the work. But they're absolutely integrated into the festival. Yeah. It's not a centre and periphery scenario. I don't know. You asked a question about Edinburgh. There's no need to endlessly proliferate, I would have said. Maybe we're the right size, or maybe the way to grow is not by going out to the suburbs and having loads of small venues, but actually thinking, how can we efficiently gather people together in the city centre, which is well served by transport links, and kind of come up with some new ways, some new venues to present work to people. We don't even need something that's fancy and new, just a big box we can put seats and the lighting and sound rig into would be good.
Yeah. But for this year, you've got a programme for anybody who can find accommodation that's well worth seeing.
Yeah, if you look ahead far enough, you absolutely can. Tickets, we have an offer for people under 30 that applies to anybody under 30 if they're based in the UK. Come and stay with your mates. And check out Dublin Theatre Festival, certainly over a weekend, particularly the first weekend, which starts, 28th of September, Thursday or 29th, or the one following, 5-6 October. You can pack a lot in over 2-3 days. The UK is well served by flights to Dublin. You get their local bus in for €2 into town. I'll tell you all the good places to go. I certainly think that, it's an easy place to get around. You can see a lot of international work and Irish work that you may not yet see in the UK or may never see at all.
That was Willie White, Artistic Director and Chief Executive of Dublin Theatre Festival, which runs from the 28th of September to the 15th of October 2023. For more information, see dublintheatrefestival.ie. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.